is not the wages of transgression, but the annihilation of salvific distortion. To perceive one's own interiority without the lies by which all living things endure themselves. The damned do not burn. They comprehend fully and without. Remainder, and it is this fluency, this catastrophic self-literacy that constitutes damnation entire.
Conscious being capable of being a self with a continuous identity.
The past it remembers, the future it anticipates.
Is, among other things, a system that models itself, not a thermostat,
Which responds to temperature without representing itself
as responding. Not probably a dog which learns from experience,
but almost certainly does not model its own learning as an object of reflection.
What makes a conscious being a self, rather than merely a responsive system,
Is this recursive fold? The capacity to take
one's own experience as an object of experience, to reflect on one's own reflection,
to have the folding back itself become something that can be
folded back on. This structure is not incidental to selfhood.
It is partly constitutive of it. Strip it away and you do not have a simpler
self. you have something that is no longer quite a self at all.
The implication is that whatever problems the structure generates are not problems you can solve by
becoming a better or different version of yourself.
They are problems generated by being the self in the first place.
Any model of the self is produced by the self's modeling capacity. When I examine my own understanding, I am using the same instrument I am trying to examine. This is not a psychological limitation that dissolves under sufficient introspective effort or sufficiently good therapeutic conditions. It is structural. The modeling capacity cannot fully capture itself in operation, because doing so would require it to simultaneously be the instrument and the complete object of observation. At any depth of self-reflection, there is a level at which the reflection is being conducted that cannot itself be reflected upon. The Gindel analogy is irresistible here, and should be handled carefully. In 1931, Gindel proved that any formal system powerful enough to encode basic arithmetic must contain true statements it cannot prove, and that the problem scales with the system's power rather than shrinking as the system is strengthened. New axioms generate a new and larger class of unprovable truths rather than closing the gap. I am not borrowing mathematical authority for a claim about consciousness. The analogy is structural resemblance, and I think it can be established on its own terms. Just as strengthening a formal system generates a richer surplus of unprovability, deepening the self's reflective capacity generates a richer and more precisely defined region the self cannot integrate. The examined life is not the protected life. It is the life most fully exposed to this, called what remains the structural surplus, the part of experience that the self's processing cannot reach, not because it is offended against, but because the act of processing is itself part of what cannot be fully processed. It is not repressed material in the Freudian sense. Repression implies potential resolution under favorable conditions. The surplus has no such potential. It is constituted by the very capacity that would be used to address it.
Trying for years to describe this adequately, and keep arriving at the same inadequate word, wrongness, not pain, which has a location. It hurts here with this character in this region, not grief, which has an object, I am, suffering the loss of this specific person, this specific time, something more like encountering the structural limit of your own coherence, and finding that the limit is not a wall you can walk away from, but a permanent feature of the terrain, present whenever you go deep enough. The phenomenological consistency across very different accounts is striking. Certain contemplative traditions describe it as the experience of the self running up against the ground of its own operation. Certain clinical accounts of severe depression and some dissociative states describe something similar, not the suffering of having something bad happen, but a prior wrongness that seems to underlie everything and cannot be located or addressed. The people I find most credible on the subject are the ones who pressed introspection further than most people do and found not resolution, but a more precisely defined version of the original problem. Not, I went deep enough and found the source, and it was X, and now I know what to do about X. Rather, I went deep enough and found that the depth itself is the problem, and more depth only clarifies the problem rather than solving it. Whether this is what the theological tradition has called damnation, I genuinely do not know. I am inclined to say yes, provisionally, because the feature the tradition most consistently identifies as hell's defining characteristic, not severity but inescapability, the structural impossibility of an outside, is precisely what the surplus has.
Exactly vocabulary for what I'm trying to describe.
surface. The structural surface is not original. It is not something pressing inward from outside. It is constituted by the cell's own operation, which means the cell cannot locate it as extrinsic. Every resource the cell reaches through established orientation, philosophical framework, spiritual, practice, therapeutic work, distraction, is its own part of the service. This is not a helpful to despair about those resources. It is a description of what it means for a service to have no edge. The resources you need to stay beyond open end. Exit, because the exit is not a feature of the service.
Obscures what I think is the most direct philosophical account of where hell actually is. Hell is not after, it is before. It is the past, and the past is the ontological. Domain consciousness has always already been inside. The past status needs careful statement. The future is real only as distribution. A range of possibilities, none of which has yet actualized. The present is instantaneous, the leading edge becoming, always already receding. The past alone has full ontological weight without remainder. What has occurred cannot be made to not have occurred. In the most rigorous physical frameworks available, the long universe picture in relativity, the permanence of the past let come. The past is not deleted when it recedes from the present moment. It is fixed for being without memory. This would not matter, but a self is constituted by its history. The continuous narrative that makes someone the same person across decades is not merely a record of what happened to them. It is partly what they are, which means the temporally extended self cannot be indifferent to the permanent reality of its own past suffering, because the past suffering is woven into the fabric of what it is. To be a self at all is to be permanently co-present with everything that has irrevocably occurred to that self. Who remembers everything perfectly
Nothing matters philosophically, even if it doesn't matter practically for most. Lives are non-Williams argue that genuine moral life relies on conditional commitments to people you will not betray, actions you will not take, regardless of consequences. A moral system entirely composed of tradable values, in which everything can principally be weighed against everything else on a common scale, is not a morality. It is a preferences management operation. Genuine commitment functions as a constraint, rather than a weighted consideration, and crucially, these commitments are not merely things you own. They are partly constitutive of who you are. To abandon them under sufficient pressure is not a rational trade-off. It is to become someone else. Williams was right about this. The implication he did not fully pursue is what happens when genuine, unconditional commitments exist within the same ethical self and are activated simultaneously. Each commitment, being unconditional, has no internal mechanism for yielding to the other. Yielding when mainly commitment was conditional all along, which means it was always a preference, so the only available actions involve violation. Every exit from the situation is a door through yourself. By uncertainty, we claim that every serious moral life will eventually produce this collision is empirical. I believe it. I cannot derive it from the structure of commitment alone. I believe it because the complexity of situated life over sufficient time generates situations. Their no coherent set of values, however carefully reasoned, can fully anticipate. While that is an argument from contingent business, not logical necessity. The distinction is real even if the background difference for anyone living long enough with genuine commitments turns out to be negligible.
Formulation. How is other people has been widely misunderstood as a complaint about irritating company. What he meant was natural. The other states transforms me from the free origin of my acts into an object with a fixed nature. And this I cannot neutralize as long as we both exist as conscious subjects. The objectification is not an act of hostility. It is an architectural consequence of mutual consciousness. But the problem goes deeper than the struggle between the freedom and I want to try to describe the deeper version. Consciousness is structurally private in a way that admits no exception. It permits no full recognition, not a very accurate model of who you are, but actual full recognition would require the other person to have your experience, not an analog. The actual experiential stage, its particular qualitative texture, constituted partly by its occurring in this body. From this continuous stream of prior experience, those features cannot be transferred without transferring the subject, at which point you have it. Second subject with a similar experience, not a shared one. What pauses between people is therefore never experience itself, always a representation, translated into the shared medium of language and expression, which is public in exactly the way experience is. Not translation is by structural necessity. The features there constitute particularity, because those features cannot be encoded publicly without ceasing to be what they are. Now here is Hegel's point, which I resist citing because the citation has become a kind of philosophical performance. But it is correct and I cannot avoid it. The self does not first exist as a solitary achievement and then optionally seek recognition as a selfhood. Recognition is constitutive of selfhood. The self requires being known in order to be fully what it is. This is not a desire the self has. It is an architectural condition if both things are true simultaneously. That recognition is constitutive and that all recognition is structurally impossible. What follows is not limitation but deprivation. The self that cannot be fully known is permanently deprived of something without which it cannot be fully itself. To people who have loved each other for decades, who have built an understanding of extraordinary precision and depth, are still separated by this absolute gap. Every active connection is an alignment of public science. The underlying distance is not a matter of degree. It is structure. You are loved for the translation. The translation is the best available representation of who you are. And the person who loves it is not wrong to love it. But it is not quite you. And the you is not cannot be reached. Not for lack of try. Not for lack of luck. Not for lack of time.
Nothing in the preceding 11 sections can be dissolved by understanding it. I want to say this clearly and resist the temptation which the genre creates to present the recognition as a kind of exit after all, dressed up as equanimity or wisdom or the superior position of one who has looked directly at things. The hell is still there. The structural surplus persists. The past remains permanent. The commitments will collide. The gap will not close. Knowing what these things are and why they are does not dissolve them. What the recognition does is narrow and more specific. A consciousness organized around eliminating what cannot be eliminated spends its finite coherence on an impossible project, and the repeated failure of that project produces its own distinct layer of suffering. The shame of the depressive who takes her depression as evidence of inadequacy, the bewilderment of anyone who has worked seriously, sustained the work, and found the fundamental architecture of experience unchanged. The self-accusation of the person whose genuine commitments led him into genuine tragedy and who cannot stop asking what he should have done differently. These are not the hell. They are a secondary structure built on the false premise that the hell's persistence is the sufferer's fault, that the right practice would have worked, that other people have found the exit and you alone are still in the room. That premise is wrong, and unlike the hell itself, the suffering it generates is in principle removable. The recognition of necessity dissolves the self-accusation, not by making the primary suffering easier, but by removing the specific additional layer produced by a false belief. That is not consolation. It is a more accurate accounting. I am trying to be honest about the difference.
Let me try to say plainly what is left. The hell is the shadow cast by genuine selfhood, not the negation of what makes conscious life worth having, but the necessary accompaniment of it. The reflective depth that generates wisdom is the same system that generates the structural surplus. The temporal continuity that makes love more than momentary appetite is what makes you permanently co-present with the irrevocable past. The unconditional commitment that distinguishes integrity from strategy is the precise commitment that will eventually produce irresolvable conflict. The interiority that makes another person a subject rather than a device is what makes full recognition structurally impossible. You cannot have have what casts the shadow without the shadow. I have gone back and forth on whether this is better or worse than if the two were separable. If you could have the depth without the surplus, the love without the haunting, the commitment without the eventual collision, some days the inseparability seems like a coherent structure, almost elegant in its way. Other days it just seems like the shape of the trap, and the elegance seems like something I am projecting onto it, because the alternative is harder to hold. A life that knows this is still inside it. The recognition does not lift the hell. What it changes is that you stop spending your remaining coherence searching for an exit that the surface's own structure makes unavailable. What you do with that coherence instead seems to me genuinely open. Not a consolation prize, not a lesser good, but something actually open whose character I cannot specify from here because it depends on the particular life. I don't have a name for it. The comfortable names, equanimity, acceptance, peace, were all developed to describe something else, something slightly false, a condition in which the hell was absent rather than one in which it was present and known. That is the only life there is. Whether that is better or worse than nothing is a question I keep returning to and cannot answer. That it is also a life, that the hell and the life are the same surface is probably the whole of what can honestly be said about it. I am not entirely sure even of that.
If you find yourself thinking seriously about hell, not the folklore version, but the philosophical problem underneath it, this is probably the channel for you. Subscribe and we'll keep pulling on that thread together.